The rain came down in sheets so thick that Fiona Campbell could barely see 3 feet ahead of her. But she kept walking because there was nowhere else to go, and stopping meant giving up entirely. Her dress clung to her body like a second skin, the threadbare fabric offering no protection against the deluge that had turned the main street of Green River, Wyoming, into a river of mud. It was August of 1878, and she had exactly nothing left in this world except the clothes on her back and a heart that felt like it had been trampled by 1,000 horses. The boarding house had thrown her out that morning when she could not pay her rent, and the man she had traveled west with, the man who had promised her a new life, had disappeared 3 days prior with every cent she owned. She stumbled, catching herself against a hitching post, and that was when the tears came. They mixed with the rain on her cheeks, hot and bitter, and she did not even try to hold them back anymore. What was the point? There was no one to see her break down, no one who cared whether she lived or died in this God-forsaken town. She had no family back east to return to, no friends in this territory, and no prospects for work that would not destroy what little dignity she had left. The reality of her situation crashed over her like the storm itself, and she sank down against the post, her legs simply giving out beneath her. "Miss, are you hurt?" The voice cut through the sound of rain, deep and concerned, and Fiona looked up to see a man standing over her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that channeled water off its edges in steady streams. In the dim light of the storm, she could barely make out his features, but his eyes were kind. She could see that much. "I'm fine," she managed to say, though her voice cracked on the words. "Please just leave me be." "Can't do that, miss. You'll catch your death out here." He crouched down beside her, and she could see him better now. He had a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, eyes the color of warm honey, and a face that looked like it had seen its share of hard living but had not yet forgotten how to be gentle. "Do you have somewhere to go? Someone waiting for you?" The question broke something inside her, and fresh tears spilled over. "No, I have nowhere. I have no one." She expected him to make his excuses and leave. That was what people did when confronted with someone else's misery. Instead, he reached out and gently took her arm, helping her to her feet with a strength that seemed effortless. "Well, that's not true anymore," he said quietly. "My home is your home now." Fiona stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? You heard me right. I've got a ranch about 2 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's dry and warm, and there's food. You can stay there until you get back on your feet." He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he invited drowned women to his home every day of the week. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "Name's Owen Garrett. I run cattle and horses, been in these parts for about 5 years now, and you are Fiona Campbell." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently now. "Why would you do this? You don't know anything about me." "I know you're in trouble, and I know I can help. That's enough for now." He shrugged out of his oilskin coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like leather and sage. "Come on. My horse is just over here. We need to get you somewhere dry before you take ill." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could not possibly accept such charity from a stranger, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form the words, and honestly, what choice did she have? Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. So she let Owen Garrett lead her through the rain to where a sturdy bay horse stood waiting, patient despite the storm. He lifted her into the saddle like she weighed nothing at all, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse forward into the storm. The ride to his ranch felt both endless and impossibly short. Fiona drifted in and out of awareness, her body pressed back against Owen's chest, his warmth seeping into her despite the rain. She caught glimpses of the landscape through the downpour, rolling hills and scrub brush, the distant mountains just dark shapes against a darker sky. By the time they reached his property, she was shaking so hard her muscles ached. The ranch house was small but solidly built, with a covered porch that offered blessed shelter from the rain. Owen dismounted first, then reached up and lifted her down, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so." "Good. I need to get Duke here into the barn." "Go on inside, the door's not locked. There's a bedroom to the right, you'll find dry clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Get out of those wet things and wrap yourself in a blanket. I'll be back in just a few minutes." He was gone before she could respond, leading the horse toward a barn she could barely see through the sheets of rain. Fiona pushed open the door to the house and stepped inside, dripping water all over the wooden floor. The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a kitchen area that looked well used but tidy. She found the bedroom easily enough, a small space with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and the trunk Owen had mentioned. Her fingers were numb and clumsy as she opened the trunk, finding men's clothing neatly folded inside. She pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers, both far too large for her, but dry. It took all her remaining strength to peel off her sodden dress and undergarments, and she was standing there in nothing but her skin, reaching for the shirt, when she heard the front door open. "Don't come in here," she called out, panic making her voice sharp. "Wasn't planning on it," Owen called back, amusement coloring his tone. "I'm getting the fire going. Take your time." Her face burned despite the chill in her bones as she hurriedly pulled on the borrowed clothes. The shirt hung off her shoulders, and the trousers required rolling up multiple times, but they were blissfully dry and soft from many washings. She found a belt in the trunk and used it to keep the trousers from falling down, then wrapped herself in a blanket from the bed and ventured back out into the main room. Owen had indeed gotten a fire going, and the warmth of it drew her like a magnet. He had changed his own clothes and was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled absolutely heavenly. When he looked up and saw her, his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Those suit you," he said. "They're enormous," she replied, but she was too grateful to really complain. "Better than staying in wet clothes. I'm heating up some stew. You should eat something, get your strength back." Fiona moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the flames. The shaking was finally starting to subside, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her want to curl up on the floor and sleep for a week. "Mr. Garrett, I need you to understand something. I have no money to pay you for this kindness. I can't compensate you for the food or the shelter or the clothes. Did I ask you for money? No, but then stop worrying about it." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and carried them to the table. "Come sit down and eat." She wanted to argue, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, betraying how long it had been since her last meal. Defeated, she sat down at the table and picked up the spoon he offered her. The stew was simple, beef and vegetables in a rich broth, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. Owen ate in silence across from her, giving her space to collect herself. When she finally set down her spoon, bowl empty, he pushed his chair back and stood. "You need rest. Take the bed, I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Fiona protested. "You can and you will. You've been through hell today and you need proper rest." His tone brooked no argument. "We can talk more in the morning, figure out what comes next. For now, just sleep." She was too tired to fight him. She made her way back to the bedroom, closed the door behind her, and collapsed onto the bed. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the sound of rain drumming on the roof and the crackle of the fire in the other room. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and for a moment, Fiona could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back, the rain, the despair, the stranger who had offered her shelter. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching, and became aware of voices coming from the other room. Owen's deep rumble and another man's voice, higher and more animated. "I'm telling you, Owen, you can't just bring a strange woman to your ranch and expect no one to talk about it. I don't care what people talk about, Marcus. She needed help. And that's admirable, truly, but you know how folks are. They'll say you've taken her as a mistress or some such nonsense. Let them say what they want." Fiona's stomach clenched with shame. She had not even considered how this would look, how her presence here might damage Owen's reputation. She should leave, should walk out that door and not inflict her troubles on this kind stranger any longer. But where would she go? She stood, straightened the borrowed clothes as best she could, and opened the bedroom door. Two men looked up as she entered. Owen stood by the stove, and beside him was a shorter man with sandy hair and a friendly, open face. The other man's eyes widened when he saw her. "Good morning, Miss Campbell," Owen said. "This is Marcus Flynn, my foreman. Marcus, this is Fiona Campbell. She'll be staying here for a time, madam." Marcus tipped his hat to her, his expression curious but not unkind. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Flynn." Fiona nodded to him, then turned to Owen. "I couldn't help but overhear. I don't want to cause you trouble. If my being here will damage your reputation, I should go." "Go where?" Owen asked bluntly. "Do you have somewhere else to be?" She could not meet his eyes. "No." "Then you'll stay. I don't give a damn what the gossips say, and anyone who knows me knows I wouldn't do anything improper. You need help, and I'm offering it. That's the end of the discussion." Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, Owen, I might have a solution that could help with both problems. Sarah's been saying she needs help at the house. Her pregnancy is making it hard for her to keep up with everything, and you know I worry about her overexerting herself. What if Miss Campbell came to stay with us? She could help Sarah with the household tasks, and it would be a more appropriate arrangement." Owen frowned, but before he could speak, Fiona cut in. "That would be wonderful. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Flynn. I can cook and clean and mend and do laundry. I would be happy to help your wife in exchange for room and board." "See, problem solved." Marcus grinned. "Sarah will be thrilled to have another woman around. Lord knows she gets tired of just talking to me and the ranch hands all day." Owen did not look thrilled with this solution, but he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, Miss Campbell, but I want to be clear that you're welcome to stay here. I meant what I said last night." "I know you did," Fiona said softly, "and I'm grateful more than I can express. But Mr. Flynn is right. This arrangement would be better for everyone." The tension in Owen's shoulders suggested he disagreed, but he did not argue further. Instead, he poured coffee for all of them, and they sat around the table, while Marcus chatted about the ranch, and his wife Sarah and their small house on the eastern edge of Owen's property. Fiona learned that Marcus had worked for Owen for 3 years, that Sarah was due to have their first child in 4 months, and that the ranch employed 5 other men who lived in a bunkhouse near the main barn. After breakfast, Owen hitched up a wagon and drove Fiona and Marcus to the foreman's house. It was smaller than Owen's, but just as well built, with a small garden out front that was showing the wear of neglect. A woman appeared in the doorway as they approached, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She had kind brown eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Marcus Flynn, who have you brought home?" she called out, but she was smiling. "This is Miss Fiona Campbell, Sarah. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping you out around the house." Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, Marcus, truly. Miss Campbell, you're an answer to prayer. Please come in, come in." Owen helped Fiona down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "anything at all, you send word. Understood?" "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Garrett, for everything." His honey-colored eyes searched her face, and she had the strangest feeling that he wanted to say something more. But then Marcus was calling to him about checking the north fence line, and the moment passed. Owen climbed back onto the wagon and drove away, glancing back once before disappearing around a bend in the road. "Come inside and let me show you around," Sarah said, linking her arm through Fiona's. "I have to warn you, the place is a bit of a mess. I've been so tired lately that I can barely keep up with the basics." The house was indeed cluttered, but it was also warm and welcoming in a way that made Fiona's heart ache. This was a home, filled with love and life, so different from the cold boarding houses and dingy hotel rooms she had known these past months. Sarah showed her the spare bedroom, barely more than a closet but with a real bed and a window that looked out over the prairie. "It's not much," Sarah apologized. "It's perfect," Fiona said, and meant it. Over the next few days, Fiona threw herself into work. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, weeded the garden, cooked meals that made Marcus declare her a saint, and helped Sarah with tasks that were becoming difficult in her condition. She also learned more about Owen Garrett, because Sarah and Marcus could not seem to help talking about him. He had come to Wyoming from Texas 5 years ago, they told her, after his parents died and he sold the small farm they had owned. He had built his ranch from nothing, working harder than any man should have to work, and had earned the respect of everyone in the territory. He was fair with his employees, generous with those in need, and absolutely incapable of turning away anyone who asked for help. "That's how he ended up with half the cattle he owns," Marcus said one evening over dinner. "Folks would come through heading west, run into trouble, need to sell off their livestock cheap. Owen would buy them at a fair price even when he didn't really have the money to spare. Now he's got one of the biggest herds in the county. He's never married." Fiona asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a knowing look that made her cheeks heat. "Never," Sarah said. "There was a woman a few years back came through with a wagon train. They seemed fond of each other, but she was set on getting to Oregon and he couldn't leave the ranch. Far as I know, there hasn't been anyone serious since." Fiona told herself she had no reason to feel pleased by this information. Owen Garrett's romantic history was none of her concern. He had helped her when she desperately needed it, and she was grateful, but that was all. The fact that she found herself watching for him whenever she heard horses approaching, or that her heart did a strange little skip whenever he stopped by to check on things, meant nothing at all. Owen came by the Flynn house often, always with some legitimate reason. He needed to discuss ranch business with Marcus, or he had brought supplies from town, or he wanted to check on a fence that bordered their property. But his eyes always sought out Fiona, and he always found a reason to speak with her, even if just for a few moments. "How are you settling in?" he asked one afternoon, finding her in the garden pulling weeds. "Very well. Sarah and Marcus have been incredibly kind." "Good, that's good." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "There's a dance in town next Saturday to celebrate the end of summer. I was wondering if you might want to attend. With me." Fiona's heart began to race. "Mr. Garrett, I don't think that would be appropriate. People already talk enough as it is. I told you, I don't care what people say, and call me Owen, please. Mr. Garrett makes me feel like my father." He crouched down beside her in the dirt, heedless of his clean trousers. "I'd like to spend time with you, Fiona. May I call you Fiona?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then will you come to the dance with me?" She should say no. She should maintain a proper distance and remember her place. But when she looked into his warm eyes and saw the hope there, she found herself nodding. "I'd like that, but I don't have anything appropriate to wear." "We'll figure something out." "Thank you, Fiona." He stood and headed back toward his horse, and Fiona sat back on her heels, her mind whirling. What was she doing? She had known this man for less than 2 weeks. He had been kind to her, yes, but that did not mean anything beyond simple human decency. She could not allow herself to develop feelings for him. She had made that mistake before with Daniel, the man who had promised her the world and then stolen everything she had. She could not be so foolish again. But Owen was not Daniel. Everything about him, from the way he spoke to the way he carried himself, was honest and true. She could see it in how his employees respected him, how Sarah and Marcus spoke of him with genuine affection, how he had opened his home to a stranger without asking for anything in return. That evening, Sarah came to her room with a dress draped over her arm. "I heard Owen invited you to the dance," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm too pregnant to wear this anymore, but it should fit you with a few alterations. What do you say we spend tomorrow making you look absolutely beautiful?" Fiona took the dress, a lovely blue calico that would indeed need taking in but was otherwise perfect. "Sarah, you've already done so much for me." "Nonsense. You've been a blessing to us, and besides, I like you. You make Owen smile in a way I haven't seen in years." That's worth any amount of sewing. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Fiona and Sarah worked on the dress in the evenings after the day's chores were done, taking it in at the waist and adjusting the hem. Marcus teased them both mercilessly about all the fuss, but even he admitted the final result was stunning. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Owen came to collect Fiona in the late afternoon, driving a buggy instead of riding horseback. He had cleaned up, shaved, and put on a crisp white shirt with a string tie, and when he saw Fiona in the blue dress, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You look incredible," he said, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The drive into Green River was pleasant, filled with easy conversation about the ranch and the coming autumn and nothing of real consequence. But beneath the casual talk, Fiona was acutely aware of Owen beside her, the warmth of his presence, the occasional brush of his arm against hers when the buggy hit a bump in the road. The dance was being held in the town's largest barn, which had been cleared of equipment and decorated with lanterns and ribbons. Music was already playing when they arrived, a lively fiddle tune that had couples spinning across the floor. Owen helped Fiona down from the buggy, and she was immediately conscious of people watching them, whispers spreading through the crowd. "Ignore them," Owen murmured, placing a proprietary hand at the small of her back. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." He led her into the barn, and within moments they were swept onto the dance floor. Fiona had not danced in years, but Owen was a strong lead and she found herself following his steps easily, laughing as he whirled her around the floor. For the first time since coming west, she felt genuinely happy, like maybe, just maybe, things might actually be all right. They danced several dances, took a break for refreshments, then danced some more. Owen introduced her to what seemed like half the county, and while some people were clearly curious about her sudden appearance, most were friendly enough. An older woman named Mrs. Peterson cornered Fiona near the punch bowl and subjected her to a pointed interrogation about her background and intentions, but even that could not dampen her spirits. "I'm sorry about that," Owen said, when Mrs. Peterson finally swept off to terrorize someone else. "She thinks she's the moral guardian of the entire territory. It's all right, I understand why people would be curious. That doesn't give them the right to make you uncomfortable." His jaw tightened. "If anyone treats you poorly, you tell me." "Owen," she laid a hand on his arm, "I'm fine. Truly, I've dealt with much worse than a nosy old woman." His expression softened. "I suppose you have. Do you want to talk about it? About what happened before you came to Green River?" She had known this question would come eventually, but she still was not sure how to answer it. The shame of how completely she had been fooled, how thoroughly she had trusted the wrong person, still burned hot in her chest. But Owen had been nothing but honest with her. He deserved the truth. "Let's step outside," she said quietly. They walked out into the cooling evening air, away from the noise and light of the barn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Fiona wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and gathered her courage. "I was working as a seamstress in Philadelphia," she began. "I had a small shop, nothing grand, but it was mine and I was proud of it. Then I met a man named Daniel Crawford. He was charming and handsome, and he told me he was headed west to start a freight business. He said he wanted me to come with him, that we would be married once we got settled in a new town. I believed him." Owen's hands clenched into fists, but he did not interrupt. "I sold my shop and everything I owned. We traveled west together, staying in hotels along the way. He always had an excuse for why we couldn't get married yet, always one more town we needed to reach first. By the time we got to Green River, I had started to suspect the truth, but I didn't want to admit it. Then one morning I woke up and he was gone. He'd taken all the money, even the little bit I had been hiding for emergencies. The hotel owner gave me 2 days to pay my bill or get out. I found work doing laundry for a boarding house, but it barely covered my rent and meals. Then I tore my dress on a piece of machinery, and the boarding house owner accused me of being careless. She demanded I pay for a new uniform, but I had nothing, so she threw me out. And that's when I found you," Owen said quietly. "That's when you found me. At my absolute lowest point, completely out of options." She turned to face him. "I've asked myself 100 times why you helped me. No one does something like that without expecting something in return. What do you want from me, Owen?" He looked genuinely surprised by the question. "I don't want anything from you except your company, if you're willing to give it. Maybe that sounds naive, but it's the truth. My parents raised me to help people when I could. They always said that we're all just a few strokes of bad luck away from being in desperate need ourselves. That's a rare philosophy. Maybe, but it's the only way I know how to live." He stepped closer to her, his eyes searching her face in the fading light. "I'll be honest with you, Fiona. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night in the rain. You could have given up, could have just stayed there in the mud and let the world beat you down. But you didn't. You survived, and now you're working hard and making a new life for yourself. That takes strength. That takes courage. And I find myself wanting to know everything about you, wanting to be part of whatever comes next for you." Fiona's breath caught in her throat. "Owen, I'm not sure I know how to trust someone again. Daniel destroyed that part of me. Then we'll take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people getting to know each other. What do you say?" She thought about saying no, about protecting herself from the possibility of more pain. But looking at Owen, at the sincerity in his eyes and the gentle smile on his face, she found she did not want to say no. She wanted to take this chance, wanted to believe that maybe not all men were like Daniel, that maybe she could have something real and good with this cowboy who had offered her shelter from the storm. "All right," she whispered. We can try." His smile could have lit up the entire prairie. "That's all I'm asking for. Now, what do you say we go back inside? I believe the next dance is a waltz, and I've been looking forward to holding you properly all evening." Heat flooded Fiona's cheeks, but she let him lead her back into the barn. The fiddle player had indeed struck up a waltz, and Owen pulled her into his arms with a confidence that made her heart flutter. They moved together across the floor, closer than was strictly proper, and Fiona found herself relaxing into his embrace. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, and she could feel the strength in him, the solidness that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a very long time. They stayed at the dance until late in the evening, and when Owen finally drove her back to the Flynn house, Fiona's feet were sore from dancing, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in months. Owen walked her to the door, and for a moment they stood there in the moonlight, neither quite ready to say good night. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Fiona said. "The pleasure was entirely mine. May I call on you again? Properly, I mean. I'd like that." He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Good night, Fiona Campbell." "Good night, Owen Garrett." She watched him walk back to his buggy and drive away, and only when he was out of sight did she finally go inside. Sarah was waiting up, of course, eager for all the details, and Fiona found herself recounting the entire evening, from the dancing to the conversation outside the barn. Sarah listened with bright eyes, occasionally interjecting with squeals of delight. "I knew it," Sarah said triumphantly when Fiona finally finished. "I knew from the first moment I saw you two together. You're perfect for each other. Sarah, we barely know each other. Some things you just know. Marcus and I were married 3 months after we met, and we've been happy every day since. When it's right, it's right." Fiona wanted to believe that, wanted to think that maybe she had finally found someone who would not betray her trust. But the fear was still there, lurking beneath the growing affection she felt for Owen. She had been so sure about Daniel, and look how that had ended. How could she trust her own judgment now? The answer, she supposed, was time. She would take things slowly with Owen, as he had suggested, and see what developed. If he was truly the man he seemed to be, that would become clear. And if he was not, well, at least she would discover it before she gave him her whole heart. Over the following weeks, Owen became a fixture in Fiona's daily life. He came by the Flynn house nearly every day, sometimes on ranch business but increasingly just to see her. They would walk together in the evenings after her chores were done, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved horses more than cattle, but kept cattle because they were more profitable. That his mother had been a schoolteacher and had made sure he could read and write and do figures. That he dreamed of someday having a house full of children and teaching them to love the land as he did. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her father who had been a tailor and taught her to sew, about her mother who died when Fiona was 12 and left her to keep house for her father and 3 younger brothers, about how her father had remarried when she was 17, and his new wife had made it clear that Fiona was no longer needed or wanted in the house, about how she had struck out on her own and built a life through sheer determination and hard work. "You lost everything when Daniel stole from you," Owen said one evening as they walked along a creek that ran through his property. "Your business, your security, your independence, that must have been devastating." "It was," Fiona admitted. "The money was terrible, but what hurt most was realizing I had been such a fool. I pride myself on being practical and clear-headed, and yet I let a handsome face and pretty words completely blind me to the truth. That doesn't make you a fool. That makes you human." We all want to believe the best of people, especially people we care about. Do you believe the best of people? He considered the question. I try to, but I've also learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts about you were right from the start. What were your instincts? He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. That you were strong, that you were honest, that you were worth knowing. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, and that I was going to fall in love with you. Fiona's heart seemed to stop and then start again at double speed. Owen, I'm not asking you to say it back. I know you need time and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, but I wanted you to know how I feel. I wanted you to know that this isn't a game for me, and I'm not going to disappear or change my mind or betray your trust. I'm in this, Fiona. Completely. She looked up into his honest face, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and felt something crack open inside her chest. The fear was still there, but it was being crowded out by something bigger and stronger and infinitely more terrifying. She was falling for him too, had been falling for him since that night in the rain, and there was no point in denying it anymore. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. But I promise you, I will never give you reason to regret trusting me. I swear it, Fiona. She believed him. God help her, but she believed him. So she stepped closer and rose up on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of all the hope she had thought she lost. Owen made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand cupping her face while the other wrapped around her waist. The kiss deepened, and Fiona felt like she was falling and flying all at once, her entire world narrowing down to this moment, this man, this perfect feeling of rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean what I hope it means? It means I want to try. It means I'm willing to see where this goes. It means I'm falling for you too, even though it terrifies me. I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice. I swear it. They walked back to the Flynn house hand in hand, and when Sarah saw them, she actually clapped her hands together in delight. Marcus just rolled his eyes good-naturedly, and said he supposed Owen would be coming around even more often now. Owen stayed for dinner, and the four of them sat around the table talking and laughing until late into the night. For the first time since coming west, Fiona felt like she was part of something, like she belonged somewhere. It was a feeling she had never expected to have again. The courtship that followed was sweet and proper, and everything Fiona had once dreamed of, but never really expected to experience. Owen took her on picnics by the creek, brought her wildflowers, taught her to ride horseback even though she was terrified at first. They attended church together on Sundays, sat next to each other during the sermon with their shoulders touching, drawing knowing looks from the congregation. Mrs. Peterson still sniffed disapprovingly whenever she saw them, but most people seemed to accept that Owen Garrett had found himself a woman and was courting her honorably. As autumn arrived and the weather began to cool, Fiona found herself thinking more and more about the future. She loved helping Sarah, but she knew that once the baby came, Sarah would want to manage her own household again. Where would Fiona go then? She had a little money saved now from the small wages Marcus, and Sarah insisted on paying her despite her protests, but not enough to rent a place of her own. And truthfully, she did not want to leave. She had built a life here, had found people who cared about her. The thought of starting over somewhere else filled her with dread. Owen must have sensed her growing unease, because one evening in late September, he asked her to take a walk with him. They headed toward his ranch house, and Fiona felt a flutter of nerves when she realized where they were going. She had not been inside his home since that first night, had avoided it to maintain propriety. But Owen led her right up onto the porch and through the front door. I want to show you something, he said, guiding her through the main room to a door she had not noticed before. He opened it to reveal a second bedroom, this one larger than the one she had slept in that first night. It was empty except for a rocking chair by the window. "I don't understand," Fiona said. Owen took both her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I've been thinking about how to do this, what to say, but I'm not good with fancy words, so I'm just going to speak plain. Fiona Campbell, I love you. I've loved you from the moment I saw you crying in that rain, and I'll love you until the day I die. I want you to be my wife. I want us to build a life together in this house, fill it with children and laughter and all the love we can hold. Will you marry me?" Fiona's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in so long they were tears of joy. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Owen, I'll marry you." He let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak, and she kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her love and relief and happiness into it. "I don't have a ring yet," Owen said when they finally came up for air. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you'd say yes before I spent the money, but we'll go into town tomorrow and you can pick out whatever you want. I don't need anything fancy, just something simple. You can have anything you want. Everything I have is yours now." They spent the evening making plans, deciding on a date in late October for the wedding, discussing how they would arrange the house and what chores would need to be redistributed once she moved in. Owen wanted to hire more help so she would not be overburdened, but Fiona insisted she was not afraid of hard work. They compromised on hiring a woman from town to help with laundry and heavy cleaning. When Owen finally drove her back to the Flynn house, both of them were giddy with excitement. Sarah took one look at their faces and burst into happy tears, which set Fiona off crying too, and soon both women were sobbing and hugging while Marcus and Owen stood by looking bemused and vaguely alarmed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Fiona sewed herself a wedding dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Sarah helped despite being increasingly uncomfortable in her advanced pregnancy, insisting that she would not miss this for the world. Marcus and Owen worked on finishing the inside of the house, adding shelves and a new table and chairs for the kitchen. The ranch hands built them a proper bed frame as a wedding gift, massive and sturdy enough to last a lifetime. The wedding took place on a cool October morning in the small church in Green River. Nearly the whole town turned out, curious to see Owen Garrett finally tie the knot. Fiona walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she held her head high. She was not being given to anyone. She was choosing this, choosing Owen, choosing the life they would build together. Owen stood at the altar in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on her as she approached. When she reached him and took his hand, he leaned close and whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony was brief, the vows simple but heartfelt. Fiona promised to love and honor Owen, and he promised the same to her. And then the preacher declared them husband and wife, and Owen kissed her to enthusiastic applause from the congregation. Even Mrs. Peterson was dabbing at her eyes, apparently moved despite her earlier disapproval. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food provided by seemingly everyone in the county. There was music and dancing and toasts that grew increasingly bawdy as the evening wore on, and the whiskey flowed more freely. Fiona danced with Owen, with Marcus, with several of the ranch hands who good-naturedly competed to make her laugh. She felt light and free and happier than she had ever been in her entire life. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Owen took her hand and led her toward the house. Their house now, Their home. The guests cheered and whistled, and Fiona blushed but did not look away. She was not ashamed of what was about to happen. She loved her husband and she wanted him, and that was nothing to be embarrassed about. Inside, Owen had lit candles throughout the house, bathing everything in soft golden light. He closed and locked the door behind them, then turned to face her, suddenly looking uncertain. "Fiona, if you're nervous, we can wait. I don't want to rush you into anything." She crossed to him and laid her hand against his cheek. "I'm not nervous. I want this. I want you." The uncertainty vanished, replaced by a heat that made her breath catch. Owen pulled her close and kissed her deeply, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. She helped him with trembling fingers, and soon the dress pooled at her feet. He shed his own clothes with far less care for their condition, and then they were skin to skin, and Fiona gasped at the sensation of it. Owen lifted her and carried her to their new bed, laying her down with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. He made love to her slowly, carefully, making sure she was ready before joining them together. There was a moment of pain that made her tense, but Owen stilled, murmuring reassurances, waiting until she relaxed before moving again. And then the pain faded, and there was only pleasure building and building until Fiona cried out and shattered, Owen following her over the edge moments later. Afterward they lay tangled together, both breathing hard, and Owen pulled a quilt over them. "Are you all right?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm perfect," Fiona whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when Fiona woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the window and Owen's steady breathing beside her, she felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened her. This was real. This was hers. This man, this home, this life. She had been so lost just a few months ago, and now she had everything she had ever wanted. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together and coordinate their different approaches to household management. But the underlying foundation of love and respect made it easy to work through any disagreements. Owen was patient when Fiona struggled with managing the larger household, and she was understanding when he got caught up in ranch business and forgot to come in for meals. They learned each other's rhythms, found their balance, and grew closer with each passing day. In November, Sarah went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. Fiona was with her through the entire ordeal, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her to keep pushing when she was sure she could not. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with Marcus's sandy hair and Sarah's brown eyes, Fiona cried nearly as hard as the new parents. They named him Thomas and asked Fiona and Owen to be godparents. Winter came hard that year, with snow starting in December and barely letting up through January. The ranch work was brutal in the cold, and Fiona worried constantly about Owen when he was out in the storms. But he always came home safe, stamping snow off his boots and pulling her into his arms, his face cold against her neck until she squealed and pushed him away laughing. It was in February, during a brief warm spell that melted some of the snow and made the world feel almost spring-like, that Fiona realized her monthly courses had not come in quite some time. She counted back, trying to remember when she had last bled, and realized with a jolt that it had been before Christmas. Nearly 2 months. She said nothing to Owen right away, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But as the weeks passed and her stomach began to feel unsettled in the mornings and her breasts grew tender, she became increasingly certain. Finally, in early March, she could not keep the secret any longer. They were eating dinner when she blurted out, "I think I'm going to have a baby." Owen nearly dropped his fork. "What?" "I'm pregnant, Owen. I'm almost certain of it. For a moment he just stared at her, and then his face split into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms and kissing her soundly. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Fiona, I'm over the moon. I'm the luckiest man alive." He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I can't wait to meet you." Fiona laughed, tears streaming down her face, and ran her fingers through his hair. This was everything she had never dared to dream of, more happiness than she had thought possible for someone like her. And it was real, and it was hers, and she was never letting it go. The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, losing weight instead of gaining it. Owen hovered constantly, driving her mad with his concern, until she finally snapped at him that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to let her breathe. He backed off slightly, but she still caught him watching her with worried eyes when he thought she was not looking. By summer, the sickness had passed, and Fiona's belly began to swell. She felt the baby move for the first time in July, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp in wonder. Owen felt the baby kick for the first time a few weeks later and looked so awed that Fiona fell in love with him all over again. Sarah was an enormous help, coming over frequently to share advice and hand-me-down baby clothes that Thomas had already outgrown. The two women spent long afternoons sitting on the porch, sewing baby blankets and discussing the mysteries of motherhood while Thomas napped nearby and Owen and Marcus worked within shouting distance. As Fiona's due date approached in early October, Owen became increasingly anxious. He refused to go far from the house, delegating most of the ranch work to Marcus and the other hands. He prepared the bedroom meticulously, making sure everything was clean and ready, that they had plenty of water and clean linens, and whatever else the midwife might need. The baby decided to arrive on a clear October evening, exactly one day before their first anniversary. Fiona's water broke while she was making dinner, and the contractions started soon after. Owen sent one of the hands racing for the midwife while he helped Fiona to the bedroom, his face pale with worry. "It's going to be fine," Fiona told him, even as a contraction gripped her and made her gasp. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "That doesn't mean I have to like seeing you in pain," Owen muttered. But he held her hand and let her squeeze as hard as she needed to through each contraction. The midwife arrived and shooed Owen out of the room, but Fiona could hear him pacing outside the door, occasionally calling in to ask if everything was all right. The labor lasted through the night, long and exhausting, and there were moments when Fiona was certain she could not continue. But the midwife was experienced and encouraging, and finally, as dawn light began to creep through the window, she made one last tremendous push and the baby slid free. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, and moments later a lusty cry filled the room. "Owen," Fiona called, her voice hoarse. "Come meet your son." Owen burst through the door as if he had been shot from a cannon. His eyes were red-rimmed and his hair was standing on end, but his face transformed when he saw the baby, now cleaned and wrapped in a blanket, cradled in Fiona's arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, and Owen let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's perfect," Owen whispered. "Fiona, he's perfect. He is, isn't he?" She looked down at their son, at his shock of dark hair and his tiny features, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Owen said, "What about Daniel?" Fiona stiffened. "Why would you want to name him after that man, not after him? In spite of him?" Owen sat carefully on the edge of the bed, never taking his eyes off the baby. "That man hurt you, stole from you, left you with nothing. But if he hadn't, you never would have been in Green River that day. I never would have found you. We wouldn't have this." He gestured at the three of them, this little family they had created. "So maybe we take that name and make it mean something good instead of something painful. Make it mean new beginnings and second chances." Fiona considered this, then slowly nodded. "Daniel it is, then. Daniel Marcus Garrett, after our son and the friend who helped bring us together." "Perfect," Owen said and leaned in to kiss her gently. "You did so well, love. I'm so proud of you." The midwife left after making sure both mother and baby were healthy, promising to check in the next day. Sarah and Marcus came by later that morning, cooing over the baby and bringing food since Owen had been too distracted to eat and Fiona was ravenous after the ordeal. The ranch hands stopped by in groups throughout the day to offer congratulations and admire the new arrival. Everyone agreed he was the finest baby ever born in the territory, and Owen accepted their praise with the ridiculous pride of a new father. That night, after all the visitors had left and the baby was asleep in the cradle Owen had built, Fiona lay in bed watching her husband. Owen stood by the cradle, one finger stroking their son's impossibly soft cheek, murmuring quiet words of love and promise. The sight made Fiona's throat tight with emotion. "Come to bed," she said softly. "He'll be awake again soon enough, wanting to be fed." Owen came and lay down beside her carefully, pulling her close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For trusting me enough to build this life together. For giving me a son. For everything, Fiona. You've made me happier than I ever imagined possible." "You saved me," she said simply. "That night in the rain, I had given up. I was ready to just lie down and let the world win. But you wouldn't let me. You offered me shelter and kindness and eventually love, and you gave me a reason to keep fighting. So really, I should be thanking you. How about we call it even and just agree we're lucky to have found each other? I think that sounds perfect." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Daniel was a good baby, but he was still a baby, which meant sleepless nights and constant feedings, and more laundry than Fiona had thought possible for such a tiny human. But every time she looked at his little face, every time Owen held him and sang silly songs or talked to him about horses and cattle, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she had stumbled into. Winter came again and then spring, and Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a fat, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything. In May, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again, much sooner than she had expected. Owen was thrilled, already talking about giving Daniel a sibling close in age so they could play together. Fiona was more apprehensive, remembering how difficult the first pregnancy had been, but she was also happy. She had always wanted a large family, and it seemed Owen was determined to give her one. This pregnancy was easier, with less sickness and more energy. Fiona was able to keep up with her household duties and chase after an increasingly mobile Daniel, who learned to crawl in June and was pulling himself up on furniture by August. Owen expanded the house that summer, adding 2 more bedrooms so they would have space for a growing family. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth, was born in February of 1880, during a snowstorm that rivaled the one from Fiona's first winter in Wyoming. The birth was faster than Daniel's, which the midwife said was common with second babies, and Grace came into the world with a full head of blonde hair and her mother's blue eyes. Daniel, now 16 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly until Fiona had to gently redirect his enthusiastic affection. Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The ranch prospered, allowing Owen to expand his herd and hire more hands. Daniel grew into a boisterous, adventurous little boy who followed his father everywhere and insisted he was a cowboy just like Papa. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and watch the world go by. In 1882, Fiona gave birth to twin boys, James and John, who were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. James was loud and demanding, while John was placid and easy. The house that had once seemed too large for just Owen now felt almost too small, filled with the noise and chaos of 4 young children. But Fiona would not have changed a thing. She had gone from having nothing and no one to having more than she had ever dreamed possible. A husband who loved her, healthy children, a home that was truly hers, and friends who had become like family. Sarah and Marcus had 3 more children after Thomas, 2 girls and another boy, and the 2 families spent countless hours together. The children played while the adults talked and laughed, and Fiona marveled at how far she had come from that desperate woman crying in the rain. Sometimes, late at night after the children were asleep, Owen would pull Fiona onto his lap and hold her close, and she would think back to that first evening when he had found her at her lowest point. She thought about how easily he could have ridden past, how most people would have. But he had stopped, had offered his home, had seen something in her worth saving, and in return she had given him her heart, her trust, her whole life. "What are you thinking about?" Owen would ask, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just how grateful I am," she would reply. "For you, for all of this. I'm the grateful one. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona Garrett." And she would kiss him and lead him to their bedroom, where they would love each other with the passion and tenderness that had only grown stronger over the years. Their love was not perfect. There were disagreements and frustrations and hard times. But it was real and it was solid and it was theirs. As the years passed, the children grew and the ranch continued to prosper. Daniel proved to be a natural horseman, just like his father, and began helping with the ranch work as soon as he was old enough. Grace showed an aptitude for numbers and helped Fiona keep the household accounts. The twins were still young enough to be more hindrance than help, but they tried their best, which was all anyone could ask. In 1885, when Fiona was 31 years old and Daniel was 7, she gave birth to her 5th and final child, another boy they named William. The birth was difficult, and the doctor told her afterward that she should not have any more children, that her body needed time to recover. Fiona was secretly relieved. She loved her children dearly, but 5 was plenty, and she was ready to focus on raising the ones she had rather than continuing to expand their family. Owen took the news in stride, saying that 5 healthy children was more than most men could hope for, and he was content. They hired a woman from town to help with the housework and the children, giving Fiona more time to simply enjoy her family rather than being constantly overwhelmed by the work of caring for them all. Life continued to be good. The children thrived, the ranch grew, and Fiona and Owen's love deepened with each passing year. They celebrated 10 years of marriage with a party that brought out half the county, and Fiona wore the same blue dress she had worn to their first dance together, let out at the seams to accommodate the changes pregnancy had wrought on her body. Owen told her she was even more beautiful now than she had been then, and she believed him because his eyes never lied. On quiet evenings, when the children were playing outside and the chores were done, Fiona and Owen would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the prairie. They would talk about the children's latest antics, about ranch business, about nothing in particular. And Fiona would think about how close she had come to losing everything, How easily her story could have ended in that rain-soaked street in Green River. But it had not ended there. It had begun there. A cowboy had stopped and offered shelter to a woman who had nowhere else to go, and from that single act of kindness, an entire life had grown. A marriage, a family, a home filled with love and laughter. It was more than Fiona had ever dared to hope for, more than she had believed possible. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Owen one evening, many years after that first night. "Taking in a stranger, upending your whole life for someone you didn't even know." Owen looked at her with those warm honey eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such kindness in the rain all those years ago. "Not for a single second," he said. "You were never a stranger, Fiona. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even though I came with nothing, even though I was broken and scared and had no prospects, especially because of all that, you could have stayed broken, could have let your circumstances defeat you. But you didn't. You fought, you survived, you thrived. That's who you are, Fiona Garrett. That's the woman I fell in love with." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching as Daniel taught Grace how to properly rope a fence post while the twins chased each other in circles, and baby William sat in the grass pulling up handfuls of it and examining them with intense concentration. This was her life now. This was her family, her home, her future. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Owen replied, pulling her closer. "My home is your home now and always." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Fiona closed her eyes and felt nothing but gratitude. She had been lost, and Owen had found her. She had been broken, and he had helped her heal. She had been alone, and he had given her a family. The Wild West had been harsh and unforgiving to so many, but to her, it had been generous beyond measure. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Daniel grew into a fine young man, responsible and hardworking, taking on more and more of the ranch duties as Owen's hair began to show silver at the temples. Grace became a beauty, thoughtful and kind, with young men beginning to show interest despite her tender age. The twins remained inseparable, getting into mischief as often as not but always watching out for each other. And William, the baby, proved to be sensitive and artistic, always drawing pictures of the horses and the mountains and his family. By 1890, the ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. Owen had proven himself to be not just a good man but a smart businessman, making wise choices that ensured their prosperity even in difficult years. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and cattle disease, but they had survived it all and come out stronger. Fiona had become a pillar of the community in her own right, known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made it her mission to ensure no one in Green River suffered the way she once had. She organized collections for struggling families, helped newcomers find work, and always had food and shelter available for those who needed it. Owen supported her completely, often joking that his wife had a bigger heart than the entire territory combined. Marcus and Sarah remained their closest friends, their children growing up alongside the Garrett children like cousins. Thomas was now a young man himself, helping his father run the eastern section of Owen's property. The Flynn family had prospered alongside the Garretts, and the two families remained intertwined in the way that only happens when people go through life's challenges together. On a crisp autumn evening in 1890, Fiona stood in her kitchen preparing dinner while Owen sat at the table with William, helping him with his arithmetic. Through the window, she could see Daniel and Grace working with the horses, Daniel's patience with his sister evident even from a distance. The twins were supposed to be doing chores but were instead engaged in what looked like a sword fight with sticks. "Boys," she called out the window, "those sticks better be for kindling and not for hitting your brother." "Yes, madam." They called back in unison, immediately dropping the sticks and heading toward the woodpile. Owen chuckled. "Those two are going to be the death of us." "Probably," Fiona agreed, but she was smiling. "But I wouldn't trade them for anything." That night, after the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Owen pulled Fiona into their bedroom and closed the door. He had a look on his face that she recognized, a mixture of tenderness and desire that still made her heart race even after 12 years of marriage. "What brought this on?" she asked as he pulled her close. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he murmured against her neck. "How easily I could have lost you before I even found you. What if I had ridden past that day? What if someone else had found you first?" "But you didn't ride past and no one else found me." "You did, and here we are." She cupped his face in her hands. "Stop thinking about what could have been and focus on what is. We have a good life, Owen, a wonderful life." "The best life," he agreed, and kissed her with a passion that still took her breath away. They made love slowly that night, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. At 36, Fiona's body bore the marks of 5 pregnancies and years of hard work. But Owen still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. And at 42, Owen's face showed lines of sun and wind and hard living, but to Fiona, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him standing over her in the rain. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Fiona thought about the woman she had been 12 years ago. That woman had been so broken, so hopeless, convinced that her life was over at 24 years old. She could never have imagined this future, this happiness. Sometimes it still felt like a dream, like she might wake up and find herself back in that rain-soaked street with nowhere to go. But then Owen's arm would tighten around her, or one of the children would call out in the night, and she would remember that this was real. This was her life. She had survived the worst, and because of that, she could truly appreciate the best. The years continued their steady march forward. Daniel fell in love with a rancher's daughter from the neighboring county, a sweet girl named Alice who won Fiona's heart immediately. They married when Daniel was 22 and Alice was 19, and built a small house on the western edge of the Garrett property. Within a year, they gave Fiona and Owen their first grandchild, a boy they named Owen after his grandfather. Grace had suitors lined up, but she was in no hurry to marry, insisting she wanted to see a bit of the world first. She went to Denver for a year, staying with one of Fiona's old friends from Philadelphia who had also moved west, and came back with refined manners and big dreams. Eventually, she fell in love with a teacher who came to Green River to start a school, and they married in a ceremony that was the talk of the county for months afterward. The twins went their separate ways as they got older, James taking after his father and throwing himself into ranch work, while John discovered a talent for carpentry and began building furniture that was in high demand throughout the territory. Both married in their early 20s, James to a fiery redhead who could outride most of the ranch hands, and John to a quiet woman who shared his love of creating beautiful things. William, always the sensitive one, surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that he wanted to go east to study art. It was an unusual choice for a rancher's son, but Owen and Fiona supported him, using their savings to send him to a school in Chicago. He wrote letters home regularly, filled with descriptions of the city and his studies and the amazing things he was learning. He promised to return to Wyoming eventually, that the West was in his blood and he could never leave it permanently, but he needed time to pursue his passion. By 1898, Fiona was 44 years old and a grandmother 5 times over. Owen was 50, his hair now more silver than brown, but still strong and vital. The ranch was now run primarily by Daniel and James, with Owen overseeing operations but no longer doing the day-to-day work. It gave him more time to spend with Fiona, and they took advantage of it, going on long rides across the property, picnicking by the creek where Owen had first told her he loved her, simply enjoying each other's company without the constant demands of young children. On a warm summer evening, exactly 20 years after that night in the rain, Fiona and Owen sat on their porch watching the sunset. Grandchildren played in the yard, supervised by their parents. The sound of laughter and voices filled the air, a testament to the family they had built together. 20 years, Fiona said wonderingly. Has it really been 20 years? 20 years since I found you in that rain. 21 years of marriage, a lifetime of loving you. Owen took her hand, his thumb brushing across the simple gold band she still wore. And if I'm blessed, I'll get another 20 years at least. I hope we both do. I can't imagine this life without you in it. You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere, Fiona Garrett. I'll be right here beside you until the day I die and probably haunting you even after that. She laughed, the sound bright and joyful. I'll hold you to that promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, Fiona reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From the desperate woman with nowhere to go to this, a life filled with love and family and purpose. It had not always been easy. There had been losses and disappointments, hard years and difficult decisions. But through it all, Owen had been beside her, steady and true, exactly the man he had promised to be that first night. She thought about all the women in the world who were where she had once been, alone and afraid and convinced their lives were over. She wished she could tell them that sometimes, when you are at your absolute lowest, when you have nothing left and nowhere to go, that is when life can surprise you. That is when a stranger can become a husband, when kindness can become love, when a single moment of compassion can change everything. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, as he so often did. "Just how grateful I am for that rainstorm, for you stopping instead of riding past, for everything that came after." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "My home is your home," you said, and you meant it. You gave me a home and a family and a life worth living. I love you, Owen Garrett. I will love you until my dying day and beyond. And I love you, Fiona Garrett. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest blessing I ever received. You came into my life with nothing, and you gave me everything." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. The Wild West could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be generous to those brave enough to survive it. Fiona had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. She had built a legacy of love and family that would endure long after she was gone. As the night deepened and the grandchildren were called inside, Owen and Fiona remained on the porch a while longer, unwilling to end this perfect evening. They talked quietly about plans for the future, about Daniel wanting to expand the herd and Grace's husband hoping to build a larger school and William's latest letter describing his success in Chicago. Finally, as the air grew cool, they went inside to their bedroom, the same room where Owen had first asked her to marry him all those years ago. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence, the ease of two people who had shared a life for more than 2 decades. When they lay down together, Owen pulled Fiona close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Good night, my love," Owen whispered. "Good night," Fiona replied. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, safe and warm and loved, exactly where she belonged. The woman who had been crying in the rain with nowhere to go was gone, replaced by this version of herself who had a home, a family, and a future brighter than she had ever imagined possible. And it had all started with a cowboy who had seen someone in need and offered the simplest, most profound gift of all: compassion, shelter, and eventually, love. Their story was not unique to the Wild West. Countless others had similar tales of hardship and redemption, of loss and love found. But to Fiona and Owen, their story was everything. It was the foundation on which they had built their entire lives, the reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive if you just held on long enough for someone to offer a hand up. And so the years continued, as years do. More grandchildren were born, then great-grandchildren. The ranch passed primarily into Daniel's capable hands, though Owen remained involved until his health began to fail in his 60s. Fiona grew older gracefully, her blonde hair turning silver, her face lining with the marks of a life well lived. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by dozens of family members, a testament to the love that had started in a rainstorm so long ago. When Owen finally passed in his sleep at the age of 74, Fiona grieved deeply, but not without gratitude. They had been blessed with more than 50 years together, a lifetime of love and partnership. She lived another 6 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She spent those years telling stories about Owen, about the ranch, about the Wild West as it had been, ensuring that the younger generations understood where they came from and the sacrifices that had been made to give them the lives they now enjoyed. On a spring morning in 1904, Fiona passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70. Her family laid her to rest beside Owen in the small cemetery outside Green River, under a sky as vast and blue as the one that had watched over their lives together. The gravestone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their lives, but to those who knew them, it represented so much more. It represented love conquering fear, hope surviving despair, and the incredible power of one person choosing to help another. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch, keeping the Garrett name alive in Wyoming for generations to come. And sometimes, when the rain came down hard and the thunder rolled across the prairie, the older ones would tell the younger ones about their grandmother Fiona, who had once been crying in the rain with nowhere to go until a cowboy named Owen stopped and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "My home is your home now." It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of humanity at its best, of love at its purest, of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And it all began with an act of simple kindness on a rainy night in Green River, Wyoming, in the summer of 1878.